Welcome to the North Carolina Museum of History. My name is Sally Bloom, and I'm glad you could join us today for our live event, North Carolina and World War I. I want to thank our sponsor, Blue Cross and Blue Shield of North Carolina, for helping make this event possible, and I want to thank you for sharing your time with us today. Before we get started, let's go over a few logistics. Remember that we have lots of additional resources on our website on this topic. If our stream drops, don't worry, it should pick right back up. And also remember, you can ask questions during this event. Type them in the comments section on the YouTube page and we'll answer them at the end of the event. So let's get started. We're at the entrance of our exhibit, North Carolina and World War I, 6,000 square feet that tell a story of the North Carolina experience of this time period. To help us understand that story, I want to introduce you to the man who literally wrote the book on North Carolina and World War I. Jackson Marshall is Deputy Director here at the museum and a curator of this exhibit. Jackson, can you join us? Thank you.
Sally, good morning.
Good morning. Thanks for being here. Wow. So I want to start with a big picture. Can you give us kind of a broad outline of World War I? What was it?
Yeah, World War I began in August of 1914 in France, in Europe, and then spread to the entire world after that. The United States did not enter the war until 1917, but the war by then was all over the place. It didn't end until November or the fall of 1918, so it was 4 years long.
Wow. And so how do you tell such a huge experience? How do you tell that story?
Well, that was a big challenge because it became a world war. It was fought in Russia and Africa, all over Europe. It was in the oceans all over the place. It's a huge story. It's too big for any exhibit. So what we had to do, we had to focus on the North Carolina soldier and nurse experience. And they were mostly in France and Belgium. So we focused on what was called the Western Front in France and Belgium as part of the U.S. military experience in what really was, or it began as a European war.
I understand in this exhibit that the team didn't really want to write books on the wall. Can you explain what that means when you don't put labels, lots of text on the wall?
No, we really wanted this exhibit to be more of an experience for visitors. There is text on the wall. There are we're telling the story with words, but we're also telling the story with video programs, with historical footage, with photography, and we have a trench we're actually going to walk through. So it's an experience. That's what we wanted.
Can we go in?
Sure, let's go in and start.
All right. Well, I have to say the first thing that catches my eye are children. We're talking about war. What are we doing with children here?
You know, we know as adults that young people are listening to everything. They're far more aware of what's going on. So what we wanted to do with these kids, these young students, is to let them present World War I as it started in Europe.
Okay.
So it's as if these students have been hearing their parents talk about why their country is going to war and why the emotions, why people are fearful, they're angry, they're prideful. All those countries were swept into the war by their emotions. And we're letting these students explain as if they're explaining to each other why their country is going to war.
Wow. Okay. So these kids, let's see if we can take a look at some of what these kids are saying to us.
They've even invaded Little Belgium and are heading towards France.
Maintenant, ils sont en guerre avec la Russie. Die Serben haben den österreichischen Erzherzog ermordet und muss dafür bestraft werden. Защитим наших сербских братьев от Австрии.
Şimdi Rusya da bizi tehdit etmekte.
Cities are destroyed. Thousands are dead. Thousands more are homeless.
We will not let Germany grow stronger and attack other nations.
Les Allemands ont envahi la France et ils nous attaquent. Jetzt haben sich Russland, Frankreich und Großbritannien verschworen gegen uns und Österreich.
А теперь Германия объявила нам войну.
Fransa ve İngiltere'ye güvenilmez.
They don't understand why they hate each other so much.
So you said that the United States didn't enter the war until 1917, but were any North Carolinians involved in the war? Because it started in 1914.
They were. One of our student characters is a North Carolinian. This thing is basically, we don't want to go to war, we don't go to war. The United States really tried not to get into this war. It was terrible. And the more we found out about it, the more worried we were. So the United States stayed out officially, but there were North Carolinians and other Americans that still volunteered and slipped over to Europe and joined the French or British Army. We had two North Carolinians, Kiffin Rockwell and his brother Paul, and James McConnell, who went to France, and they joined the French Foreign Legion or the French Ambulance Service and fought for the French.
Wow.
So we had volunteers that went and fought.
They really believed in what they thought the war was all about.
Kiffin Rockwell was in the Lafayette Escadrille along with James McConnell. They left the Foreign Legion, they left the ambulance service and went into the first air service.
They were
for
flyers.
France. They were flyers. They were combat
Very
flyers.
early flyers. Wow,
Yep.
that's amazing. And I look over here and I see this incredible graphic. The exhibit is just full of them. This is the sinking of the Lusitania. So is this why the United States entered the war?
No, not quite. The Lusitania was a British passenger ship that was traveling from New York City to Liverpool, England, and the Germans had warned the passengers not to get on this ship because they believed that it had ammunition on it, and they didn't. The Germans did not want the ammunition to make it to the British. This was in May of 1915, and the Germans sank the ship, and 128 Americans went down with the ship. But America still did not go into the war. President Wilson, our American president, convinced the Germans to stop sinking ships, at least for a while, so we didn't enter the war at that point.
And I see a case of artifacts here. Does this tell part of the Lusitania's story?
Yes, one of the American passengers on the Lusitania was Owen Keenan of the Keenan family in North Carolina, and he went down with the ship and was almost drowned, but he was blown to the surface by an air bubble and he survived. The pocket watch you see in this exhibit case was the watch that he was wearing when he went down with the ship, and it's frozen in time when he went into the water. But he survived and later went back to France and joined the French ambulance service as a volunteer.
That's an incredible story.
It is a
incredible
wonderful story.
So we still don't enter the war. So what finally does it? Why do we go to war?
Well, 2 years after the Lusitania went down, the Germans started sinking ships again.
Oh, okay.
And that's what really made people mad. And we caught the Germans with secret plans with Mexico, trying to convince the Mexicans if you'll go to war against the United States along with us, we'll give you back the Southwest. So there were lots of plots and things like that. And we found out also that the British and the French were running out of money. They were going to lose the war, and if they did, that would be really, really bad for America. So the United States finally decided we just have to go to war.
A lot of factors combined to
A lot
tip
of
us
things
over.
brought us into the war, and Americans did not want to fight the war, but at that point we just felt like we had to. And President Wilson said, you know, let's just go to Europe and enter into the war and simply make the Europeans stop fighting each other. Let's fight for peace. Let's make them stop fighting. That's
So
really why we fought.
that decision's made in April 1917.
Yes.
And then North Carolina boys, what happens for them? What's next?
We were totally unprepared. And as we move through the exhibit, you'll see the story of the American experience. We just weren't ready for war. We had decided we weren't going to fight, we're not going to fight. So when we did declare war, we were totally unprepared for war. So that was April 1917. It took almost a year before we actually got any troops to France to actually fight.
Wow. So they were drafted or they volunteered, and then were they expertly trained?
No, they had no time for training. They had to hurry, hurry, hurry. When the soldiers got to the camps, they found out there were no camps. There were just open fields, pine thickets. They had to clear the camps.
This is the sorriest bunch of rodents I have seen yet. You are not behind the plow. You are in the United States Army and you will act like it. Pay attention and get in line.
That was their training?
They didn't get much training. Most of the work that they did in the camps was plowing, clearing the fields.
Right.
They lived in tents. They had no helmets, no rifles, no uniforms, no boots. All of that stuff was late And then it was, you can see these men running, running, running. Everybody was in a hurry.
This is actual footage
This
of
actual
training.
footage from World War I. The soldiers were always in a hurry to get through training. They really didn't get proper military training.
They weren't prepared.
No, they
They
weren't.
weren't prepared.
Did I hear a question?
No, here he is again.
You do not get a rifle because we don't have any to give you. This wooden stick is your rifle for now. Don't y'all worry, you'll get a rifle soon enough. Just remember the pointy end goes towards Fritz.
And that's the problem. They didn't even have rifles to train with.
Wow.
They had wooden sticks.
So they get some training, and then what do they do? What training there is?
What little training they got, within months they were sent to the harbors and loaded up, just packed on ships and sent to France as quickly as possible. The voyage was 2 weeks long on terrible seas, and a lot of them got seasick. There were no airplanes to take the troops to France.
Okay.
They had to go by ship. And most of the soldiers had never left North Carolina,
Sure.
never been on the ocean before. They got very, very sick on the ship.
So I see a uniform here or a sailor's outfit, and then the case. What's going on here?
What we have in these cases are the North Carolina soldier stories and nurse stories about traveling to France, headed to the war.
Okay. So I understand these videos are based on primary sources. I know all of you know what that is. If not, your teacher's going to tell you right after this program. Primary sources, the actual understanding, the experiences, the recording of an event when it happens. And so these videos that we made, which you can see, 585 Days, If You're Lucky is the name of the video series. We have clips of those in these cases. Should we watch one about the voyage?
Watch one on seasickness.
All right,
Yeah.
let's go.
I don't care how big a man you are. If you plumb to be seasick, you will be seasick. I would pay $5,000 if they would just stop the boat for 5 minutes.
Do you want to see one more?
Sure.
All right, one more. I'm sorry, I like these.
Some of these hammocks have short ropes on one side. So when the ship tilts from the waves, you roll out of your hammock and onto the dining room table, which I do most nights.
All right, so they finally make it across, and they're in France, and oh my goodness, this is incredible. You have to see this diorama. This is amazing. So these are trenches. I'm going to get a lot of close-ups with the Sally Cam on this. This is amazing. So
yeah.
World War I, tell me about it. How was it fought?
On the Western Front, which means the battle in France and Belgium, there were 500 miles of trenches. The war was so deadly that the soldiers could not stay above ground and survive. So the armies would dig into the ground, they would dig trenches, and they would hide in these trenches. So what you have on this diorama, you have the German lines on one side, you have the French, the Americans, and the British on the other, and they're dug in these trenches. The area between the enemy trenches was called no man's land.
All right.
And that was because, they got that name because no man could survive if they got out of the trenches and went in that open space. But they had to capture the other, break through the other lines. So the whole war on the Western Front was them seesawing back and forth, trying to break each other's lines, and they never really could quite do it.
Just like yards at a time.
Yeah, just a yard at a time. They lost thousands of people at a time. But the American soldiers, when they first arrived, when the North Carolinians first arrived, this is the kind of terrain, this is the kind of battlefield that they first entered into.
I see some images here of different artifacts, and I see them in the diorama as well. What's the story there?
This is a game where you look for a soldier or a group of soldiers on the diorama. It's almost like a Where's Waldo? Where's the soldier? And then you go into the exhibit and find the actual artifact that little soldier is carrying, only it's a real thing.
That's incredible. So this definitely introduces trench warfare, and we're getting ready to enter the trenches.
The reason we did this here is because, yes, we're introducing the concept of trench warfare to people understand it, because we are about to enter into trenches that the museum built in the exhibit gallery.
So we're going to the Western Front now.
Going
So
into the Western Front, yep.
we're in the Allied lines?
We start off with the American, British, French trench lines.
Okay.
So we start with that, and as we move through the trenches, we're going to get closer and closer and closer to the battlefield.
So much to see. It's really immersive. Oh my, you got to tell me what this stuff is. This is incredible. Let's take a closer look here.
Yeah, throughout the exhibit, we have what we call relic cases. They're low to the floor. If you go to France now, the farmers are plowing up World War I relics every time they go out to plant their fields. They're plowing all this stuff up. The ground is still full of helmets and live shells and grenades. It's very dangerous. They're bayonets, rifles, buttons, belt plates, all this stuff that the soldiers were wearing and using is still in the ground on these battlefields and being plowed up.
100 years later.
100 years later, and it's still very, very dangerous in France on these battlefields even today.
That's incredible. So we're talking about the North Carolina soldiers' experience. Here we have a case about the 30th Division. Now, a lot of North Carolinians were part of that?
The 30th Division was our National Guard troops. The National Guardsmen from North Carolina, South Carolina, and Tennessee all came together to form the 30th Division. They trained in South Carolina and were sent to France. They were immediately transferred to the British Army. So our North Carolinians in the 30th Division actually did not fight in the American Army. They fought in the British Army.
And they were under British command
They
then?
were under the British command. They fought with British weapons, and they had a very distinguished record as part of the British Army in World War I.
That's quite a take from the American Revolution.
It is. We're fighting with the British now,
Right,
not
fighting with
against
the
them.
British. All right. And here I see a uniform and an 81st Division sign. Was that another group of North Carolinians?
This is another division, another infantry combat division. Now this one's very different. This one was made up of North Carolinians who were called into service. They were drafted into service. There were white soldiers. Now the Cherokee Indians were also folded into this division. But they were sent into the American Army, so they actually fought with General Pershing in the American Army.
In the American Army, okay. All right, I got to say, I see one of these cases.
We see another case. This case has stories of North Carolinians soldiers in combat.
Okay.
So and they're real stories. These stories came from the actual soldiers.
All right, let's take a look, shall we?
Okay, good.
This German comes out from a culvert along the railroad.
I arrived to the Western Front around 11 o'clock p.m., muddy and tired. The mud is almost knee-deep. We walked miles with full packs until we found our dugout. The floor is covered in mud. There's a big pool of water under the boards. We get on bunks. After the candle is out and all is still, then we get introduced to the trench rats. And oh, what a welcome they give us.
All right, do we have time for one more?
Sure, I think we should listen to another one.
I like these.
I will not call it. He didn't give that German a chance.
About 800 Fritz charge us in waves. We're told not to shoot until they're within 100 yards, and to make every shot count. The first wave of Germans gets shot down. Not a single German makes it to our trenches. The second wave keeps coming. They step over the bodies of the first wave, and then they're shot down. The next wave keeps coming. These Germans, they're suicidal.
So you mentioned that Cherokees, members of the American Indian Tribe of North Carolina, participated in World War I. Did African American soldiers participate?
African Americans did, but we have to remember that this is what they call the Jim Crow era. There was still a lot of segregation.
Okay.
Not just in the South, but in the U.S. Army. So African Americans were also called into service to serve. They did serve in World War I. A lot of them served in World War I, but there were 2 combat divisions of African Americans, but they were separated from the white soldiers. So there were 2 African American divisions.
Let's take a closer look at, so this is some artifacts from African American soldiers. I'm looking at that insignia. Tell me about that.
That's the buffalo insignia. That goes all the way back to when African Americans fought out west against the American Indians. But one of the divisions was the 92nd Division. It was a buffalo division. That was their insignia. They served in the American Army with General Pershing. They were an outstanding combat division. The other African American division was given to the French because the French were also desperate for soldiers. So those African Americans served with the French Army.
So did their participation in World War I really help their case for civil rights when they got back?
They had hoped so. But honestly, when they got back home, they really,
it was not
really
time for change
no,
yet.
It gave them a lot of hope that they would be recognized as equal Americans at that point for all their service, but it just didn't happen.
And still they served.
And they still fought for the country.
Here's another case of items that really, I think, are interesting because these are things that soldiers carried with them. Is that right?
These are the kinds of more personal kinds of things.
Take a closer look.
You know, they're things they carried their letters in and carried their shaving kits and things like that. We also have a flashlight. We have
that's the flashlight.
That's the flashlight there. We have a pocket watch. Soldiers, men, at this time period still wore pocket watches. Well, they got to World War I, and they can't crawl around in the mud and barbed wire and all that with pocket watches, so they started wearing wrist watches. So what you have in this case is a wristwatch.
Huh, so that's kind of a timely invention.
It's a timely invention.
All right.
Came from World War I, wristwatches.
So we're still going through the trenches, the Allied side of the trenches. And I see kind of a gruesome scene here. Tell me what's going on in this.
Yeah, we don't hide the fact that war is a terrible thing. So sure, our soldiers go over and they fight and they do the best they can, but we have to remember that many of them were wounded, badly wounded, and some of them were killed. So this little scene here is just to remind us of the sacrifice of our North Carolina soldiers.
And this depicts a hospital? Is this where they got first aid or what?
This scene depicts a field hospital.
Okay.
So this is like right near the battle.
Okay.
So as the soldiers would get injured on the
just
battlefield,
drag
they would
them off?
drag them off as quickly as they could, but they wouldn't go very far because the doctors would set up right near the battlefield, sometimes on the battlefield, and take care of the soldiers best they could. Then if they survived, they would send them back to the bigger hospitals.
Okay. All right, I see case after case after case of weapons, and we're not going to stop and name them all. I'm sorry for those of you who are into that, but we don't have enough time. These are all Allied weapons, right?
Yep, all these rifles are from the different soldiers, British, French, Belgian. We have all the weapons, American, all these different weapons of all the different armies that North Carolinians fought with in France.
So there's big weapons, there's small weapons, sharp,
handguns,
pointy weapons. And did you just let me get hit by a bomb?
You just got hit by a shell.
Okay. So that was kind of scary, and I'm in an exhibit, so I know that's not real. So what is all this?
Well, we have an area about artillery fire in World War I. And the reason is because shell fire, shells shot by cannons, all different sizes of cannons, killed and injured more soldiers in World War I than anything else, more than machine guns or anything. So we have different types of shells. We have shrapnel shells, like big shotgun shells that would go off in the air and throw bullets down on top of the soldiers. We have high explosive shells that would hit the ground and blow up into ragged pieces and would just cut soldiers to pieces. And we have poison gas shells too. Poison gas was terrible in World War I.
Look at that helmet. That's just incredible. So a piece of metal hit that?
A piece of shell fragment landed right on top of that soldier's head.
I mean, that's horrible.
It was terrible. The shell fire just tore soldiers to pieces.
All right, I see another case. What stories are we going to hear here?
Well, these are North Carolina soldier stories. They're actual stories that the soldiers told. But here comes another one.
Ah, okay.
These stories are about North Carolinian soldiers under shell fire, and that's what these stories are about.
All right, let's watch one.
We're bringing the boys out of the lines. The English are relieving the American soldiers. Of course, the German army has good intelligence, so they know what we're doing. And the shells are falling like raindrops. I don't know how many are killed, but I can hear them hollering now. I'll never forget the sound.
Do we have time for one more?
Sure, I think we should listen to another one.
These are amazing.
I am assigned to a 75mm field piece and learn quickly as the battle is ongoing. My duty is to shove the shell into the gun. We are working down in a gun pit. There are 4 men. One man punches the fuse into the end of the shell. Another man opens the breech. I shove it in, and he closes the breech. Another fellow pulls the lanyard and fires it. I do this night and day without changing positions once. I do a whole lot of shoving in shells. It is my job. I've never seen a gun fired in my life, of course. That's not much to learn, shoving in shells.
All right, wow, those stories are, the reality of them just makes them that much more moving. Unbelievable.
N'y allez pas, il y a des Allemands avec des mitraillettes, des mitraillettes partout, ils vont vous tuer si vous y allez. Des mitraillettes. N'y allez pas, il y a des Allemands
You told me this was the North Carolina soldier experience. I'm sorry, that guy's speaking French.
He is French. That's a French soldier. The reason we have a French soldier just pop up in the trench line is the fact that our North Carolina soldiers, most of them didn't know French. And yet when they went into the trenches, they would run into French soldiers who were their friends. And the French soldiers would be trying to tell them something like, come with me, we got to attack, or don't go, it's too dangerous. But how did our soldiers know what he was saying? So we introduced a French soldier in the exhibit, and you have to guess what he's telling you.
All right, let's watch him say one more thing, see if they can figure it out.
Non, n'y allez pas, non, arrêtez-vous. N'y allez pas, il y a des Allemands avec des mitraillettes partout, ils vont vous tuer si vous y allez. Des mitraillettes.
I hope they guessed right.
I guess so, they had to.
All right, more trenches. It just goes on and on and on. That's terrifying. What is going on here?
What we're looking at here, we produced this film here at the museum. These are German soldiers coming through a poison gas cloud as if they're coming right past you or right at you as a North Carolina soldiers. So you see this icky yellowish gas, and the German soldiers are wearing gas masks.
So if I didn't have on my gas mask at this time, what would have happened?
You wouldn't see them very long because you would die. You would just collapse to the ground and die. Poison gas was terrible in World War I. It's the first time it was ever used in war. It was so terrible that after the war, all the countries came together and said we should never, ever use poison gas again because it's just so terrible.
I see here a case of artifacts about poison gas. These are different kinds of gas masks. They really vary.
So we have British and German and American gas masks. We have some French gas masks. All the armies came up with different gas masks, and they kept trying to improve them as the war went on because the gases got even worse and worse and more deadly as the war went on.
So this case I see a lot of the uniformed soldiers, and I know in the films the soldiers are wearing that. That's the gas mask?
They always carried that gas canister, that pouch with them everywhere they went because they never knew when they were going to run into poison gas.
So did regular citizens have gas mask protection?
Regular people did not have gas masks, and that's what became so deadly, is because if the gas drifted into a village behind the battlefield, it would just kill everybody. It had no protection.
This, the devastation of this war is just heartrending. Every story you tell me just makes me realize how horrific it is.
It was very bad.
So what area is this here?
You just got
I mean,
shot.
I'm laughing, but I'm not laughing.
We just entered into what we call no man's land. This is between the Allied trenches where the North Carolina soldiers were and the German trenches. So this is an open area that they would have to attack. And of course, they would be under German machine gun fire.
So that's what that was, German machine gun.
That was a German machine gun shooting at the visitors, at you as you came through.
Okay, so we're at war, except I see here a case of tools. I mean, like, do they really have time for building? How many times are they shot? So what's this?
These are wire cutters, and yes, you wonder why would soldiers carry wire cutters? Well, they should have rifles and things, and they did. But they had barbed wire in no man's land. Both armies would put up wire to stop soldiers and tangle them up. If they got tangled up in the wire, then they couldn't move, and then they would they'd get shot. So a lot of soldiers carried wire cutters to cut their way through the barbed wire. It was an important tool of the war.
I understand. All right, so we're going through no man's land, and we're entering the German lines, is that right?
Or the Axis German trenches here. So there'll be lots of German weapons. You'll get to see the German machine gun that was shooting at us.
Lots more weapons, lots more weapons. All right, I know we're not talking about weapons today, but I have to do a close-up of this one because I had somebody ask me about a shout-out. Do you know anything about number 7?
Number 7 is what's commonly called a broom handle Mauser pistol.
And I know I'm putting you on the spot about this, so good.
No,
you've got them all memorized.
It's one of the standard. It's not the weapon the Germans carry, but a lot of German officers carried that weapon.
And I understand that that was the basis for a weapon that we might see in Star Wars. Just saying.
Yeah, they copied the looks of that weapon in modern movies.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So getting back to World War I, here we are in the German machine gun nest, right?
This is inside the German lines, and you can see the big German machine gun that was shooting at us.
Which we saw in the diorama.
We saw that in the diorama, and there's the real one. Our soldiers captured that gun. The North Carolinians captured that gun and brought it back.
And I'm going to get a closer look at this. I mean, this depiction of this soldier, he's wearing his gas mask, his helmet, but he looks like he's wearing armor like a medieval knight.
The Germans and the French did wear what they call body armor.
Okay.
Because if they stood up in the trenches where somebody could see them, they'd get shot. So they put on this extra shield of armor on them and also on their helmets. So if they got hit with a bullet, it would stop the bullet.
And I see a gun back here that is absolutely massive. Like, this is a 3-person gun, is that right?
It's a 1-person gun, but you couldn't hold it. You had to just sit it on something to shoot it. But this monstrous rifle shot a great big bullet that would go through the French and British tanks. It was an anti-tank gun.
I mean, I just have to wonder at the amount of ingenuity people spent on learning how to hurt each other.
All the nations spent a lot of time and energy and talent trying to figure out how to best kill the enemy. It's a terrible thing.
I guess it's not over.
No, it's not over.
Okay, so that guy's not speaking French.
No.
We're in the German lines, right? So that's a German soldier?
That is a German soldier. And it's the same scenario as the French soldier. Again, our North Carolina soldiers would get into the German trenches and they would run into German soldiers.
That's a different message than the first one.
That's a different message. He has 2 different messages here, as our North Carolina soldiers experienced. Sometimes the German would want our soldiers to surrender, and sometimes the German wanted to surrender. But how did our soldiers know what to do? Because they didn't speak German. They had to decide very quickly what to do with the German soldier.
Toward the end of the war, a lot of German soldiers were surrendering. Is that right? Toward the end of the war, German soldiers were
surrendering? Towards the end of the war, a lot of Germans did realize that they could not fight anymore, and a lot of them did surrender.
All right, so we're beginning to leave the trenches, but we're not leaving the story because this has been about the North Carolina doughboy soldier experience. But I understand that North Carolinians were also involved in the Navy and also in that new part of the Army, which was the Air Service, right?
The Air Service, the Army Air Corps. Again, like some of the early pilots, North Carolinians did join the American Air Service and flew combat planes or reconnaissance planes during the war. So we have a section about that as well.
So tell me about some of these artifacts here. It looks like they've got some pencils. What is that?
These are actually what they call fléchettes, which is a French word. It's an aerial dart. The pilots would take up like a bucket load of these things, and they would take them way up in the air, and they would dump them out on top of enemy soldiers. So these steel darts would fly down through the air and hit soldiers down below. These were the first aerial bombs that were ever used in combat. I mean, only 30 years later, we went from this to the atomic bomb in World War II. That's how the technology
so
changed.
Our ingenuity on how to hurt each other continues
Right, from
over
little
time.
darts to atomic bombs.
So I see some depictions here of nurses. So I guess we're talking about when they do get back from behind the field hospital to the base hospitals. What's going on here?
If the soldiers were lucky enough to survive combat and get off the battlefield to a field hospital, they were eventually put in wagons or in ambulances and taken back to bigger hospitals called base hospitals. And this is where a lot of the other doctors and nurses, a lot of nurses were there to receive them. Also soldiers that got sick with influenza or the flu or pneumonia, they were also sent to the hospitals where nurses would take care of them.
And North Carolinians were volunteering as nurses?
There were a lot of North Carolina women volunteered to serve in the hospitals in France. Base Hospital 65, one of the hospitals, was made up primarily of North Carolina doctors and nurses.
One of my favorite nurse stories is about Glory Hancock, who's a North Carolinian, I think from Asheville. She was the most decorated nurse in World War I. And I think we have one of her stories. Can we watch it in here?
Sure, let's watch, yeah.
Night duty. I just hate every day. Truly. If the war doesn't end soon, I am gonna have to chuck it. Isn't it awful of me? I've got a ward of bad cases, and I'm going hard all night. And it interests me, of course, and I'm more than sorry for them, but I just can't stand the suffering all around me. I am dying for American cooking again. And I dream of waffles and fried chicken and sundaes.
That's really, really heartbreaking. Can we see one more?
Sure, I think we should watch another nursing.
I'm assigned to a new base hospital in Carhoun, France. We have about 20 doctors, 100 nurses, and 200 medical corpsmen. Oh, and beds for 40 patients. Within the first 2 weeks of opening, we had 2,000 influenza and pneumonia patients. Most of them directly off the ships from the United States. And, well, most of them are too far gone, and they don't make it. The rest, well, we keep them warm, feed them, give them aspirin.
That was really a moving story as well. So we're coming toward an image of utter devastation that speaks to the end of the war. How did the war end?
Everything just kind of stopped. I know that doesn't make any sense, but all the armies were so worn out, they had lost so many men, that in November of 1918, the Germans finally agreed to a ceasefire. It was not a surrender, it was simply that all the armies just agreed to just stop fighting. So on November the 11th, 1918, at 11 o'clock in the morning, everything just stopped.
Just an end.
It just ended like that way, but nobody really won the war.
Well, that's what I want to ask you. So if the war ended, nobody was victorious, what was that outcome?
It left things undecided. So they ended the war, but nobody had really won it. The Germans agreed to end the war just to stop things. Now later, the British and the French especially came in the peace table and started hammering the Germans, made them pay money. They took a lot of land away from Germany. they did a lot of things that made the Germans really mad, which just made things worse for the future.
I see over here, like we saw the kids at the front, here are some adults. What are they talking about?
Well, this tells that story. We have 5 European characters and an American character, again presented. And this is like between World War I and World War II.
Okay.
They talk about what happened to their countries in World War I, which was not good, it was terrible. And then they also are beginning to feel that something's not right.
It's
going to come back, something's coming back. The Germans are angry, they're going to come back and start fighting again, which is exactly what happened. So this is kind of a bridge between World War I and what became World War II.
So these are the children grown up?
They could be the children grown up 20 years later.
Wow.
And they see another war on the horizon.
Let's take a look at what they have to say.
Okay.
We forced the Germans to surrender and pay for invading Belgium and France.
Mais des millions de personnes ont été blessées ou tuées pendant cette horrible guerre.
Wir waren einen harten und verhassten Friedensvertrag zu unterzeichnen.
Война была катастрофой.
Impedimente İngiliz ve Fransızlar topraklarımızın çoğunu resmen çaldılar.
Entire cities and thousands of homes were destroyed.
We have helped to maintain world peace since then.
Nous avons tous perdu un être cher. Et certains d'entre nous ont perdu leur maison.
Die Franzosen und Briten waren besonders neidenlos in ihren Forderungen gegen uns.
Мы свергли царя и создали человеческое правительство.
Vatanımızı aralarında bölüşerek garip ve anlamsız sınırlar çizdiler.
America had to go to Europe and stop them from killing each other.
That's a really cool way to tell that story about the transition, the times, the changing times between World War I and World War II.
You can see how the emotions swept them into World War I, and their emotions swept them into World War II.
Another really cool thing that you have here in the exhibit are these series of maps. Tell us what these 3 maps are talking about.
Okay, the first map shows Europe as it was when the war began, when World War I began in 1914. And then the second map shows us what Europe looked like right after World War I was over, because many of the boundaries of these different countries changed.
Well, and the Ottoman Empire dissolved,
The
right?
Ottoman Empire collapsed and was all busted up, broken up. The Austro-Hungarian Empire broke up.
Okay.
Germany was broken up. So a lot of the countries that fought in World War I were broken up, including Russia. So we show before the World War I, after World War I, and then we show a map of Europe today, because again, the boundaries in Europe keep changing. We don't think about that in the United States because our state lines stay the same. But in Europe, the national boundaries keep changing over and over.
That's a really good way to help people understand what's going on. Now, Jackson, I've got kind of a strange question because I've been thinking about these soldiers, these North Carolina boys who had never left their farms, their homes. They go overseas, and I know when I travel, like, I often bring back a souvenir. Is that horrible to think that a soldier would bring back a souvenir?
No, they did. After the war, they would pick things up, and the French civilians would make things for the soldiers. They knew if they survived the war, they knew they were going to come home. So they would want to take some things home with them.
Like these things here?
There are things. We have many things here. The French would take shells and make flower vases out of them.
So those are the shells that brought that devastation that we saw?
These are the shells that shot those terrible explosions. And so it's part of a weapon, but the French would make flower vases out of them. They would also take other things. They took cap badges. The British Army had cap badges. All the soldiers had a different badge. So the North Carolinians would collect the badges. They would collect belt plates, and they would take all sorts of things that were made, they would bring home to their families.
Okay, so soldiers are just like me. They like souvenirs as well.
Yep, they do.
We have a couple of stunning images here toward the end of the exhibit. This one, I believe, is of a cemetery of Americans.
This is an American cemetery in France, and it's the largest American military cemetery in Europe. It's even bigger than Normandy, which is a World War II cemetery. We lost a lot of people in World War I, a lot of soldiers. Overall, in all of the war, about 9 million soldiers in all the armies were killed. Wow. Many, many more, 22 million were wounded. America also lost its share of soldiers. 116,000 Americans were killed, and over 200,000 were wounded in the American Army. North Carolina sent 86,000 men into the service, and we lost 800 from military soldiers who died in battle or from wounds. We lost many more from illness. We suffered, this state suffered a lot too. We lost a lot of soldiers, really what was only about 6 months of heavy, heavy fighting. It was a terrible war.
So it was really a generational loss.
It was. We lost a generation, and Europe really never recovered. It was terrible. And then we followed it up with yet another war.
And this image here, so we have that incredible image of the cemetery, and this image here is of poppies, and I know poppy is a symbol of World War I. Can you share what that is about?
The Canadians and the British adopted the poppy, a flower, a red flower that's in Europe. You see it all over France, as a flower of remembrance. It grows up on the battlefields now. And so people will take a poppy and they'll wear it to help just remember the soldiers and the nurses, everybody who served, and all of those who were lost in World War I. Now the Americans have adopted the poppy also as a symbol of remembrance.
And so the outcome of World War I take it, is not over.
It's not over. Much of what we're dealing with right now with Russia, angry Russia, what's going on in the Middle East, Afghanistan, all of these places are still, that we messed things up. The peace treaties were messed up. And even today in the 21st century, 100 years later, we're still dealing with the problems that World War I either created or didn't solve.
And so I really appreciate you sharing all this with us. And I have to think something you just said really triggered a thought in me that we call it World War I, but for everybody, all the North Carolinians, everybody in the world who experienced this, they didn't call it World War I. They didn't know World War II was coming. It was the war. And that's why I think it's so important that we took the time as a museum, as a state, to talk about this subject. I feel like in school a lot of times you study World War I just very briefly because it led to World War II, but it's deserving of its own study and its own exhibit and its own remembrance.
It does,
so
and unfortunately the soldiers of that war, our American soldiers, thought it would be the last war. They really wanted it to be the last war ever fought, the war to end all wars, and they were very disappointed when it turned out badly and World War II happened, then Korea, then Vietnam, and on and on and on. It was not the last war as they wanted it to be.
I understand. Well, thank you very much for being with us. Now I think we're going to have some time. If you want to type questions into the comments field on our YouTube page, if you haven't done that yet, now you can. And let's see what they have to ask us today. Do we have any questions?
We do. Our first question is, did the flu epidemic of 1918 affect soldiers overseas?
Did the flu epidemic of 1918 affect soldiers overseas?
Absolutely. The flu came about. It actually hit the German army in the summer of 1918, and lots of German soldiers got sick with it. It hit the American army in the fall of 1918, right as the war ended. In fact, thousands and thousands of soldiers died of the flu, and many of the soldiers arrived to France with the flu, or they went back home from France with the flu. It was a worldwide pandemic, and it did have an effect at the close of the war. It just made it even worse.
Our next question is, what is the most interesting souvenir that you've seen brought from the war?
What is the most interesting souvenir you've experienced? I happen to know that you personally brought back a lot of those relics that are in this exhibit.
That's a hard question. I mean, it's a great question, but it's a hard question for me to answer because everything is really cool. I think the things that I really liked the most were the things that were very personal.
Okay.
Like buttons off of a soldier's uniform, or the belt plate that came off of his belt that he wore. The things that had a very personal meaning to the soldier, and they've been left behind on the battlefield. So it makes you wonder what happened to that soldier that he lost a button or lost a belt plate.
Excellent.
Our next question is, in your opinion, what is the scariest part of the war?
In your opinion, the scariest part of the war?
I think there would be two things if I was to have to experience this, and I talked to a lot of the old soldiers. I think the two things that were the most frightening to them was the shell fire, just being pounded on. You don't know where the shells are coming from. You don't know what's going to happen. It's really scary to be shot at by shell fire. The other thing would be the poison gas, because you just don't know when that's going to happen, and it won't go away. The gas had a bad tendency of lingering and settling down in the trenches. So even after the battle was over, the poison gas would still be around, and that was very, very deadly.
I have a quick question. I'm sorry to interrupt. I want to know what was going on here in the United States on the home front. Was there a home front effort in World War I?
There was a home front. We tell our home front story in another exhibit gallery. Both the old folks, the women, the children, everybody was doing their part for the war as well. They were growing food for the soldiers. They were raising money for the soldiers. They were making clothing for the soldiers. They were writing letters to the soldiers. They were doing everything they could to support the government, support especially their soldier, the family members that they had, the nurses and the soldiers that were away. They were very worried about them, and they were trying to do everything they could to support the men and women who were fighting in the war.
Do we have another one?
We do have another question. Were there any animals used to help fight?
So were animals used in World War I?
Absolutely. You know, really, at this point, cars and trucks were very new.
Okay.
And a lot of the soldiers didn't even know how to drive a car or truck. Even if somebody said, here's a truck, drive it, they wouldn't know the first thing about how to do it. Horses and mules were still the primary animal used to pull the ambulances, the artillery, the wagons, all of those kinds of things. Horses and mules were very important to the war. And also, the Europeans used dogs. The Germans and the French had dogs. They would run messages in the battle. I mean, they were battle dogs. They would run through the trenches with messages. They would carry medical supplies to the soldiers. They would even pull little carts with ammunition.
I remember one of our North Carolina story soldiers that's in the videos where the North Carolina soldier is talking about he's working with the horses and he's collecting horses from all these different places, and he goes, and the French horses speak French and the German horses speak German. So you can watch that in 585 days.
Exactly, yeah. The horses wouldn't know what to say. If you're speaking English, they were like, I don't know English, I know only German.
All right, do we have another question?
We do. Our next question is also for Jackson. Did you have family who fought in World War I?
Did you have family that fought in World War I?
I did have family, and that's what started my journey in World War I. It was personal. My grandfather fought in World War I and was wounded by German shell fire. Two of his brothers also fought in World War I, and I had some cousins that fought in World War I. I grew up with World War I veterans in my community, and I got to know them personally, and that's why I got interested in World War I.
And that's the basis of your book?
It's the basis of my book, interviewing the old veterans of World War I.
Excellent. All right, any other questions?
Our next question is, in your opinion, how did the soldiers not having proper military training affect our success in the war?
So without proper military training, did that lack of training affect our ability to be successful in the war?
The American Army, as its commanders taught them, was very aggressive, and it was fight, fight, fight, go, go, go. But honestly, the lack of training caused a lot of casualties. Our soldiers were thrown into the battles without really knowing how to fight. They were just given a rifle and said, go. Some of them didn't even know really how to shoot a rifle. They didn't know how to survive on a battlefield. So even though the American Army helped to win the war, we lost a lot of soldiers doing so.
Unnecessarily, probably.
Unnecessarily.
That's a good question. Another one?
Our next question is, how many soldiers from North Carolina fought in World War I?
The number of North Carolinians who fought in the war, do you know?
It's about 86,000 North Carolinians. That's white soldiers, black soldiers, and American Indian soldiers all together, about 86,000.
My understanding is that when the draft was called up, more North Carolinians responded than were supposedly eligible, so that meant that underage kids were signing up?
The first draft, the first call for troops to come in was for 21-year-olds to 31-year-olds, that age block, 21 to 31. But we had soldiers who were going in at 16, 17 years old. They were not telling the truth about their age, and they were saying, I'm much older than that, and the Army would take them because they needed soldiers. So yes, a lot of soldiers went in.
And there were about 200 nurses from North Carolina.
About 200 more nurses, yep. And a lot of them, again, served in the base hospitals in France.
Our next question is about poison gas. How long did it take for gas to go away?
How long did poison gas linger? You talked about that a little bit. Do you have any idea? Was it
depended
weather
on,
dependent?
It honestly depended on how much of it was shot into the trenches and also the weather. If it was, France is really rainy and cloudy all the time, so the damper it was, the gas tended to linger. It would just settle down and it'd take days to go away. Now if it was a really breezy day with a lot of wind, the wind would blow the gas away, so that was good. But the gas would stay a long time in the trenches. And also, even after the gas cloud went away, if you touched things that had the gas on it, it could burn your hands.
Horrible.
Our next question is about if a battle lasted days, what did the soldiers do? Would they nap? Would they eat? Were they in the trenches?
So my understanding is that shelling and battles, or the front, was kind of a constant. How did soldiers survive that as far as sleeping, eating, and everything else that they had to do to just exist?
It was very difficult. The last battle the American Army fought was 47 days long. 47 days of fighting. And it only ended because that's when the war ended. Soldiers that were sent into battle like that were often trapped in the battle. Once they were in, they couldn't get out. And they just had to survive. They often ran out of food. They ran out of ammunition. Many times the wounded men could not get out. If it rained, of that 47-day battle, it rained 40 of the 47 days. So once they got wet, they just stayed wet. It was a miserable, miserable experience for our soldiers. And again, they're constantly under enemy shelling and machine gun fire.
And our last question is, did any of the technology developed during the war have a long-term benefit?
So, technology question. We talked about the devastation that a lot of this technology brought to people during that time. So were there any positive outcomes of the technology from the war?
I think medicine or treating wounded soldiers improved, and it does. That's one of the sad benefits of every war. I think our doctors and nurses, because there were so many wounded men coming into their hospitals, eventually they did learn how to help them more, help them better, to help treat them better.
Helped with loss of limbs.
Loss of limbs.
Trauma.
They started working on prosthetic limbs to help replace lost arms and legs. So that improved tremendously during the war. So there were some benefits. And of course, air flight improved during the war. The airplanes got better and better as the war went on, and that certainly helped with the civilian air flight after the war. So there were some improvements that helped people out.
I think that's all the time we have for questions today. Jackson, thank you again so much for sharing your time.
Thanks.
Yeah, this was cool. So remember, all of our live stream events are actually videos on demand after the event. You can go to our video on demand page on our website and watch them again. You can also go to our videos on demand page to see 585 Days If You're Lucky, which is the narrative films we made based on these primary sources, and see if you can figure out why it's named 585 Days. Jackson gave you a lot of clues of that throughout today's event. And finally, I hope you'll look for us next year. Our live events next year are all going to be from North Carolina historic sites. We're going to be traveling around the state to bring you all kinds of new stories. And I also want you to remember that every single day, with your choices, your words, and your actions, you make history too. Thanks, everybody.